London is home to over 215,000 millionaires, making it one of the wealthiest cities on the planet Earth. Meanwhile, just 200 miles north, people in Blackpool are dying younger than people in Rwanda. Let that sink in. A poor country in Africa now has better life expectancy than parts of the United Kingdom itself. While London shines with foreign investment and financial services, vast regions of Britain are experiencing third-world conditions. Lower life expectancy than developing nations, less disposable income than the poorest US states, infrastructure that's literally crumbling into dust. You'll want to hear this. Here's the numbers that exposes the entire scam. Remove London and the Southeast from UK GDP calculations, and the country's GDP per capita drops by 14%. That's not a statistic, that's a confession. The UK isn't a developed economy, it's one wealthy city-state parasitically attached to a declining nation. In 1980, social housing made up 30% of London's housing stock. Today, just 10%. The city that once provided affordable homes for working people has been sold off to foreign oligarchs and investment funds, turning London into a luxury playground while ordinary Britons sleep in doorways. The transportation investment gap is obscene. London receives £1,200 per capita, while the Northeast gets a pathetic £430. The government is literally starving entire regions of the investment they need to survive while showering London with infrastructure spending. This is the story of how one city broke an entire nation and why Britain's economic model is a warning to every other country about what happens when you sacrifice your people for the profits of global capital. Blackpool, a British seaside town, now has lower life expectancy than Rwanda. Read that again. A town in one of the world's wealthiest nations has worse health outcomes than a country that experienced genocide just 30 years ago. This is beyond embarrassing. It's evidence of systemic failure. Life expectancy in the most deprived areas of Britain is falling while it rises in London and the Southeast. People in Glasgow, Blackpool, and other forgotten cities are dying younger year after year. This isn't happening in a war zone or failed state. This is happening in the United Kingdom. The health disparities are staggering. A child born in wealthy Kensington can expect to live 15 to 20 years longer than a child born in Blackpool or Glasgow. Same country, same healthcare system, completely different outcomes based purely on geography. These aren't just statistics, they're death sentences. Thousands of Britons are dying prematurely from preventable diseases, drug overdoses, suicides, and despair-related conditions because their communities have been economically abandoned. The causes are obvious: poverty, unemployment, poor housing, food insecurity, lack of healthcare access, environmental pollution, and psychological stress. These are the conditions of underdevelopment, and they exist throughout vast regions in the UK. The NHS is collapsing in these regions. Hospitals are underfunded and understaffed, creating a cancer postcode lottery when survival depends on your address. Waiting times are measured in months or years. Preventative care is non-existent. People are dying from treatable conditions because the healthcare system has been starved of resources. Mental health services are non-existent in many poor areas. Depression, anxiety, and trauma are epidemic, but there's no treatment available. People are self-medicating with alcohol and drugs, which accelerates the death spiral of communities already in crisis. Food poverty is rampant. Millions of Britons rely on food banks just to eat, with the Trussell Trust distributing a record 2.9 million parcels. Children are going to school hungry, with 18% of all UK children living in food-poor households. Malnutrition, actual malnutrition, in 2025 is becoming common in Britain's poorest regions. This is third world poverty in a supposedly first world nation. The environmental conditions are toxic. Former industrial areas suffer from pollution-contaminated land, poor air quality, and degraded infrastructure. People are living in conditions that would be considered uninhabitable in wealthier areas, and it's killing them. This health catastrophe is the direct result of economic abandonment, and it connects directly to another crisis that's destroying the British dream. A housing disaster that's turning London into a playground for foreign oligarchs, while ordinary Britons become homeless. In 1980, social housing represented 30% of London's housing stock. Affordable homes for working-class Londoners. Today, it's just 10%. Where did it go? It was sold off, privatized, and turned into investment assets for foreign billionaires, while ordinary Britons sleep on the streets. The right to buy policy sounded great. Let council tenants buy their homes at discounts. The reality? Public housing was privatized without replacement. Once sold, those homes entered the private market at unaffordable prices. Social housing stock collapsed and homelessness exploded. Foreign buyers accounted for 27% of the first quarter of 2024 residential property sales in London, compared to just 0.3% in New York City. Think about that. London has become a shopping mall for international oligarchs, Russian kleptocrats, Chinese officials, and Gulf monarchs, parking their money in British real estate. These foreign buyers aren't living in these properties. They're empty. Entire luxury apartment buildings sit vacant as investment vehicles, while Londoners can't afford a studio apartment. Housing has been transformed from a human right into a speculative asset class. London property prices have exploded beyond any connection to local incomes. The average London home costs 12 to 15 times the average London salary. That's impossible mathematics. An entire generation has been locked out of homeownership permanently. The ripple effect spread throughout Britain. As London becomes unaffordable, demand pushes into surrounding areas, driving up prices across the southeast. Then those displaced residents push further out, spreading unaffordability like a virus throughout the country. Homelessness has surged. Rough sleeping has increased by over 73% in the past decade. Families are living in temporary accommodation glorified homeless shelters for years. Children are growing up in a single-room hotel because there's no affordable housing available. The private rental market is predatory. Rent consumes 40 to 60% of income from most renters. Landlords have absolute power. Evictions are arbitrary. Quality is poor. Renters have no security and no hope of ever saving enough for a down payment because rent leaves nothing to save. Build-to-rent developments are replacing traditional housing with permanent rentership. Developers build apartment blocks specifically for rental, creating a new feudal system where people rent forever with corporate landlords. The housing crisis is a form of economic warfare against ordinary Britons. It enriches foreign investments and property developers while impoverishing everyone else. It's a transfer of wealth from British workers to international capital, facilitated by government policy. This housing disaster is inseparable from the next catastrophe, a transportation investment gap that's deliberately keeping Britain's regions poor and isolated, while London gets everything. London receives £1,200 per capita in transport investment. The Northeast gets £430. Now hold on a sec. This isn't an accident or an oversight. It's systemic discrimination that ensures London thrives while other regions remain economically isolated and underdeveloped. The transportation gap is stark. London has the underground, overground, crossrail, extensive bus networks, and constant upgrades. Northern cities have aging systems, infrequent service, and infrastructure from the Victorian era that's literally crumbling. High-speed rail was supposed to connect Britain. HS2 would link London, Birmingham, Manchester, and Leeds. Instead, costs exploded and routes were cancelled, and what remains is a half-finished project that will primarily benefit London. Again, always London. Regional rail services are a disaster. Trains are overcrowded, unreliable, and expensive. Northern Powerhouse Rail, meant to connect northern cities, has been delayed indefinitely. The government promises leveling up while systemically defunding regional transport. Road infrastructure outside London is decaying. Potholes are epidemic. Bridges are crumbling. Highways are congested. Local roads are neglected. The basic infrastructure of mobility is failing throughout Britain's regions, while London gets gleaming new projects. Public transportation in regional cities is inadequate. Bus services have been slashed. Many routes operate only during peak hours. Evening and weekend service is minimal or non-existent. People without cars are trapped in economic isolation. The infrastructure gap guarantees regional economic failure. Businesses locate in London because that's where the transportation infrastructure exists. Workers move to London because that's where opportunities are. The cycle perpetuates itself, and regional Britain falls, well, further behind. Compare this to successful countries like Germany, where infrastructure investment is balanced across regions. Major cities like Munich, Hamburg, Frankfurt, and Berlin all have world-class transportation. Germany doesn't sacrifice its regions to benefit one city, but Britain does deliberately. The transportation apartheid is economic sabotage of Britain's regions. It ensures that talent, capital, and opportunity all flow to London, while everywhere else remains economically stagnant. This is policy-driven underdevelopment, and it's destroying Britain. This infrastructure discrimination connects directly to an even broader problem: the total absence of investment in the research, development, and innovation that could revitalize Britain's regions. Britain's GDP per capita looks respectable in international comparisons, until you remove London and the southeast, that is, and then it drops by 14%. That single statistic exposes the entire con. Britain isn't a developed economy. It's one wealthy city-state masquerading as a nation. GDP statistics disguise regional inequality. When London's millionaires are averaged with Blackpool's poor, the numbers look fine. But this is like measuring average wealth in a room where Bill Gates and 9 homeless people sit. The average is meaningless. Remove London from calculations, and much of Britain has GDP per capita compared to Eastern Europe. Regions of the UK are poorer than Poland, Czech Republic, or Slovenia. This is catastrophic for a country that once led the Industrial Revolution. The wealth generated in London doesn't circulate to other regions. The tax revenue collected from London's financial sector doesn't translate into equivalent investment elsewhere. London's prosperity is extracted and concentrated, not shared. Britain's service economy is fundamentally unproductive compared to manufacturing. Financial services create paper profits but few jobs and limited technological spillover. Manufacturing creates tangible products, supply chains, and broad-based employment. Britain traded productivity for profit. The disposable income gap is shocking. Some British regions have less disposable incomes than the poorest US states: Mississippi, West Virginia, Arkansas. British regions are poorer than American Appalachia. Let that sink in. Income inequality in Britain is amongst the worst in the developed world. The Gini coefficient has risen steadily for 40 years. The rich have gotten obscenely wealthy, while the poor have gotten poorer. This isn't a functional economy, it's wealth extraction. Intergenerational mobility has collapsed. Britain once had relatively high social mobility. Working-class children could rise through education and hard work. Today, Britain has lower social mobility than almost any comparable country. Birth determines destiny. The GDP numbers that make Britain look prosperous are a lie. They reflect wealth concentration, not broad-based prosperity. Britain is rich the way a third-world country with natural resources and a corrupt elite is rich. The wealth exists, but ordinary people never see it. This GDP illusion hides a fundamental truth. Britain's economic model is failing the vast majority of its people, and the lessons from this failure are critical for every other nation. The United States faces serious inequality, but it has avoided Britain's catastrophic mistake of total economic concentration in one city. America's economic centers are geographically distributed in a way that creates resilience and opportunity across regions. New York is America's financial capital, but San Francisco has tech, Los Angeles has entertainment, Houston has energy, Chicago has manufacturing and logistics, Boston has biotech and education. Economic opportunity is spread across the nation, not concentrated in one city. Regional American cities have real economies. Atlanta, Dallas, Seattle, Denver, Phoenix. These aren't declining backwards, but growing economic centers with diverse industries, good jobs, and rising living standards. Britain has nothing comparable outside London. American infrastructure investment, while imperfect, is more geographically balanced than Britain's. Major cities across America have airports, highways, and public transit. The gap between regions exists, but isn't as catastrophic as Britain's London versus everywhere else divide. Research universities are distributed throughout America. MIT, Stanford, UC Berkeley, University of Michigan, Carnegie Mellon, UT Austin, Georgia Tech. World-class research institutions exist across the country. creating regional innovation ecosystems. American manufacturing, despite decades of decline, remains more regionally diverse than Britain's. The Midwest still makes cars and machinery. The South has aerospace and chemicals. The West has defense and technology manufacturing. America didn't completely abandon manufacturing like Britain did. State-level governance in America provides regional autonomy that Britain lacks. States can craft economic policies, invest in infrastructure, and support industries in ways that British regions cannot. This federalism creates competition and experimentation. The American economic model isn't perfect, far from it, but it demonstrates that geographic diversity is crucial for national resilience. When opportunity exists across regions, nations are stronger, more stable, and more prosperous. Britain's extreme centralization is a warning to America. The US must resist the concentration of economic power in coastal cities at the expense of heartland regions. Britain shows what happens when one region wins and everywhere else loses. National decline. Britain has reached a critical juncture where the current trajectory leads to permanent decline and potential national dissolution. The question isn't whether Britain is in crisis. It's whether the crisis can be reversed before it becomes, well, irreversible. Brexit has exacerbated every problem. Cut off from EU markets, supply chains, and labor mobility, Britain's regions are even more isolated and economically vulnerable. The one policy that might have helped free movement, allowing regional workers to find opportunities elsewhere, has been eliminated. The political instability is building toward explosion. Populism is rising. Trust in institutions is collapsing. Regional resentment is growing. Britain is one major crisis away from serious political upheaval that could tear the country apart. Can Britain be saved? Theoretically, yes, with radical reform, massive infrastructure investment in regions, relocation of government departments outside London, aggressive regional R&D funding, industrial strategy to rebuild manufacturing, housing reform to stop foreign speculation. But will Britain do these things? Almost certainly no. The political will doesn't exist. The financial interests that benefit from the current system will block reform. London will not voluntarily give up its advantages. Britain will continue its managed decline until crisis forces change. Britain's collapse is a warning to every other nation. Geographic concentration, deindustrialization, financialization, and foreign capital dominance are paths to national suicide. The United States, Europe, and other developed nations must learn from Britain's catastrophic mistakes. If this exposure of Britain's hidden collapse shocked you, smash that like button. Drop a comment on whether you think the UK can survive as a unified country, and subscribe, because the next deep dive reveals another major economy that's quietly imploding in ways that will reshape the entire global order.